Good morning. Welcome to the online worship service of the Universalist Unitarian Church of Waterville, Maine. My name is Trick Gander, and I will be your worship associate today. Luke Brooks Schessler will be our worship leader today. Today's worship service will also feature music from Annabeth Rinders, Crystal Kessler, and Carl Schessler. As you will see, we have assembled this online worship service from video clips that various friends and members of this church have recorded themselves. Thank you to the many members and friends of this church who have helped put together this online worship service. If you would be interested in making a video of yourself doing a call to worship, chalice lighting, reading, music, or some other part of the service, please email the worship committee at uuworshipcommittee@gmail.com. Thank you in advance. Now on to our announcements. As usual, at 11 a.m. Sunday, May 17, 2020, we will be hosting our church's virtual coffee hour. This virtual coffee hour occurs every Sunday at 11 a.m. We will host a virtual coffee hour through Zoom, with which many of you are probably familiar by now. To join this coffee hour and to find information about how to join, go to our church's website at www.uucwaterville.com. There you'll find a link to the virtual coffee hour. You'll also find instructions on how to join. As a reminder, Karen Cusiak is willing to offer beginner training for using Zoom either as a host or as a participant. Please contact Karen if you're interested. You can come join your church friends for a virtual coffee house each Thursday evening from 6:30 to 8 o'clock p.m. Come to sing, play music, read a poem, do a comedy routine, or just to listen and enjoy. Performers of all ages are welcome. Information about how to join should be in the midweek update, and it's also posted on the homepage at www.uucwaterville.com. Scroll down the page till you get to coffee house information. If you'd like to perform, please email Harry Veo at veowoods@live.com before the coffee house. We hope to see you there. If you have any announcements that you would like to be included in these online worship services, email your announcement to uuworshipcommittee@gmail.com by 5 p.m. on the Thursday before the Sunday service, and we will include your announcement in the online worship service for that Sunday. Please note, Thursday at 5 p.m. is the new deadline. If you're able to email us announcements by that time, it will give us a little more time to get the online service together. We will now move on to the Greeting Our Neighbors portion of our service, which is a little bit different from how we do it during our in-person worship services. Usually, during this portion of our service, we exchange greetings with the people who are sitting near us in the pews. However, as we're watching this online service, we may be alone or with family members or with friends, or perhaps even in a space with acquaintances or people we don't know. As we watch this online service together, we can imagine that we are all sitting in our virtual pews, together in mind and spirit, if not in body. The purposes of greeting our neighbors as part of our service is to acknowledge the people around us who have come to worship together in our church. As we sit in our virtual pews now, take a moment to think about the other people who you see from time to time during our worship services. Think of someone who you might like to say hello to this morning. You don't have to do so right now, but at some point, use your cell phone or computer and send that person a text or an email. Give them a phone call and say something like, "Good morning. I was thinking of you today. I hope you are well, and I'm keeping you in my thoughts." Though we remain physically separated now, we can and should acknowledge our fellow riders on this spiritual journey. Now, please prepare yourselves for worship as we listen to the prelude. Chalice Lighting for Challenging Times by Lisa Dogie. Why a flaming chalice? The question comes. It's the cup of life, the answer. A cup of blessings overflowing. A cup of water to quench our spirit's thirst. A cup of wine for celebration and dedication. The flame of truth. The fire of purification. Oil for anointing and healing. Out of chaos, fear, and horror. Thus was the symbol crafted a generation ago. So may it also be for us, in these days of uncertainty, sorrow, and rage, and a light to warm our souls and guide us home.
Now for the call to worship. When News Has Been Sad by Sharon Wiley. You whose hearts are broken, come in. You whom pain has touched, and sorrow and shock. You who have cried this week, and read the news with sadness. You whom loss has shadowed, you who grieve. Come in, come in. You with hearts open to joy and hope, come in. You whom love has touched, and friendship and wonder. You who have laughed this week, and felt gratitude for life's many blessings. You to whom gifts are given in abundance. You who rejoice. Come in, come in. All our hearts are broken and open. All of us here grieve and rejoice. This is our place, and this is our hour, to gather and sing and cry and laugh. Come in, let us worship together.
The story for all ages this morning is Professor Wormbog's Gloomy Kerploppus by Mercer Mayer. This was a favorite book in our family with both Luke and our daughter Libby. And now Luke's children enjoy it, so we are going to read that to you this morning. One day, Professor Wormbog's pet Kerploppus was very gloomy. This is the Kerploppus. Can you see the Kerploppus? This is him lying on his bed. He wouldn't eat his bowl of grapes or play fetch the stick. He'd just lay in his bed and sighed all day. And on the picture, it shows him sighing all day. And here's Professor Wormbog, and he doesn't know what to do with his pet Kerploppus. Oh dear, thought the professor, I'd better call Dr. Windbag. Surely he'll know what to do. After all, he's a doctor. So Professor Wormbog goes to call his doctor, but he calls him from a phone booth. He calls him from a phone booth that has a sign on it that says out of order. And the birds think that he's very silly because he's using an out of order phone. So that's what they're talking about up on the line. Dr. Windbag was just fixing himself a cucumber sandwich when the professor called. He put the sandwich in his hat and rushed right over. And when he got there, the Kerploppus was still saying all day. Oh my, yes, said the doctor. Your Kerploppus certainly does look gloomy. The best thing to do is bathe him in fresh cucumber juice. Call me if he doesn't seem better. So Professor Wormbog picked bushels and bushels of cucumbers from his garden. So here's Professor Wormbog carrying all the cucumbers. And you'll notice that this book had a little accident. I think that was about 36 years ago it had that accident. What's he going to do with all those cucumbers, say the birds? Beats me, the other bird says. He boiled up a big pot of them and he bathed his Kerploppus in the juice all night long. In the morning, the Kerploppus still wouldn't eat his breakfast or fetch his stick. So there he is. He's bathing all night. So he changed from saying all day to saying all night. And Professor Wormbog is boiling up more cucumber juice. I have to cough. I'm going to get the... Dr. Winbag complained, Professor Warmbog. My Kerploppus is still very gloomy. Very well, answered the doctor, who was just about to mow the yard. Take the little fellow on a picnic in the country. That'll surely cheer him up. So there he is with his pet. Dr. Windbag is out in his yard with his pet, chewing on the grass. Off they went to the country, with the Kerploppus all bundled up so he wouldn't catch a chill. The grass was green and all the flowers were in bloom, but the Kerploppus didn't cheer up. So here they are in the car, headed out to the country. He just sat around and sighed all day. So look at the place where they went. On the way home, they even stopped for burgers and shakes, but it didn't help a bit. So look at all the people in line. They think that the car with the Kerploppus in it is rather weird. Look at the looks on their faces.
Just the regular people.
Just regular people think that the Kerploppus is weird. In the morning, Dr. Windbag came by. How's our little Kerploppus, he asked. Grrr, said the Kerploppus. As you can see, he's no better, said Professor Warmbog. So here's the Kerploppus saying grrr, and Professor Warmbog says, looks real bad, he's no better, he won't eat his grapes, and he's worse. So all of his, everybody who lives in the house all think the Kerploppus isn't any better. This room is very gloomy, said Dr. Windbag. Why don't you paint it bright with bright, cheery colors? That'll make him feel better. Professor Warmbog got some bright, cheery paint from the cellar. So here they are. They're getting ready to paint with a ladder and all the different colors. He painted the room, but it did no good. Besides, the fresh paint made the Kerploppus sneeze. So look at the paint job that they did in the Kerploppus's room.
Pretty bad.
Look at that. And this is our favorite line in the whole book. It says, to pass the time while the paint dried, they took a steamship cruise to the South Pacific.
Pacific?
Yeah, so they went on a big cruise while they're waiting for the paint to dry.
Paint's already dry, probably.
They sipped coconut juice and dined on fresh bananas and pineapples. They danced the hula under the swaying palm trees, but the Kerploppus didn't care. Professor Warmbog called Dr. Windbag long distance. I'm worried, he said. Come home at once, replied the doctor. We must kick this problem around. So there's all the fun they were having, and it didn't make any difference to the Kerploppus. They hurried home, and Professor Warmbog rushed his Kerploppus to Dr. Windbag's office. I shall take an x-ray, announced the doctor. He turned on the x-ray machine. My goodness, he exclaimed. What can this be? So look.
It's actually his shoe because he was missing a shoe all the time.
That's right. So look closely at the x-ray and see what the Kerploppus has in his stomach that's been making him feel sick all that time.
See his shoe.
Yeah, and look at Professor Warmbog's foot. Okay. Grabbing the Kerploppus by the feet, he shook him upside down. Out fell a boot. Said Professor Warmbog. I was wondering where my other boot went. So look at that. He shakes a boot out of him. And I like this little guy down here, too. This little guy says, very dumb stuff. Very dumb stuff. Dr. Windbag gave them a great big bag of peppermint candy canes for being so good. Then Professor Warmbog took his Kerploppus home. So there they are, riding home. And everybody's feeling better. That night, they had a wonderful feast with all the good things that the Kerploppus loved. He ate everything. Now look at what he's got in his lap.
His head.
And it says he ate everything. So we can only assume he's having another non-food lunch. And then it says here that he was very cheerful indeed. He was very cheerful indeed. So that's the end of the gloomy Kerplopus.
So, Emrys, what song are we going to sing?
This is Right Here Waiting.
Oceans apart, day after day, and I slowly go insane. I hear your voice on the line, but it doesn't stop the pain. I see you next to never. How can we say forever? Wherever you go, whatever you do, I will be right here waiting for you. Whatever it takes, or how my heart breaks, I will be right here waiting for you. I take for granted all the times that I thought would last somehow. I hear the laughter, I taste the tears, but I can't get near you now. Oh, can't you see it, baby? You've got me going crazy. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I will be right here waiting for you. Whatever it takes, or how my heart breaks, I will be right here waiting for you. I wonder how we can survive this romance, but in the end, if I'm with you, I'll take the chance. Oh, can't you see it, baby? You've got me going crazy. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I will be right here waiting for you. Whatever it takes, or how my heart breaks, I will be right here waiting for you. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I will be right here waiting for you. Whatever it takes, or how my heart breaks, I will be right here waiting for you.
Now is the time in our service when usually we would share the joys and concerns that are in our hearts. Joys and concerns are being collected via email. However, since this online worship service will be posted online and viewable by the general public, names will be omitted in the interest of preserving privacy and confidentiality. As no concerns have been received by the church this week, we will instead offer thoughtful minds, helping hands, and loving hearts to those that remain unspoken.
For today's meditation, I just want to take a few moments to appreciate the natural beauty of this world and the beauty that we have right here in Waterville. And I know that when I'm feeling stressed out or anxious or worried, one of the most soothing and reassuring things that I can do is go into the woods, breathe in that fresh air full of oxygen, be surrounded by the trees and the shadows that they cast on the ground and the sunlight that breaks through little patches in the leaves, and just stare at the water that flows over rocks, between the rocks, that forms little bubbles on the surface that sparkle in the sunlight and then keeps flowing on. And I think about how this is a very, very challenging time, but we can keep the faith that this pandemic will end, that we'll come out of it okay, and that one day, in the not too distant future, we will be able to be together, not just in mind, not just in spirit, but in body as well. And that's something to look forward to. It's a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and it's something that I think will happen. Hey everybody, today's message is titled Faith and Mental Health in the Time of COVID-19. And this message actually has two parts. In the first part, David and Nancy Wynn are going to tell a story about a challenging situation that they went through and how they had to rely on their faith that they were just going to forge through and make it. And in the second part of the message, I'm going to talk a little bit more about faith and mental health during COVID-19. So I'm in the Colby Woods right now. I'm headed up to the top of Runnels Hill, and so I'll see you again from the top of Runnels Hill. Bye.
The story starts in the state of Washington in around 1985. Nan and I had decided we were going to walk partway up Rainier from a parking lot and just take a path around the mountain that would take us up the mountain a short distance, then across the face of the mountain, and then back down to the parking lot. We started out, there was no snow on the ground. It was fine. We had hiking boots and we were in good shape. So we started up, and as we got a little farther up, there was snow on the ground, and at some point we turned to go across the face of the mountain, and there was a fair amount of snow on the pathway, and as we started out, the pathway started to narrow more than we would have liked. And so Dan and I were at that point together, and and she can cover from there on what happened as we came to a halt. And I said, gee, this is not a good place to be. Let's go back.
I will take it from there. We started on the path with the mountain up to our left and with snow on it. And we were going down across the mountain's face on a rather narrow path. And we got, I suppose, maybe 20 feet or 30 feet in on the path. And I realized that I had my right foot on the path, but I could not bring my left foot up past my right leg. All my weight was on the front foot, and I realized I could not walk. So I stood there, and I began to feel some fear rising. And I looked up the mountain to the left, and I could see the snow, but I knew I could not lean to the left to touch the mountain to help me be stable, because then I would throw myself off balance and I would slip and fall. On my right, I looked down and the mountain went straight down. And I looked down, and what I saw was a cloud bank. I could not see where the mountain went. And then the fear took over totally. And if anybody has ever been paralyzed with fear, you know what I'm talking about, because I was literally frozen in my tracks. I could not turn around. I could not go forward. The mountain was to the left, which I couldn't reach. To my right was a bank of clouds, but with the mountain going straight down. So I realized that if I fell, I didn't know what I would fall into, nor would I be able to survive a fall. I then had to think very hard. What am I going to count on? Am I going to count on the fall being not so severe that it would kill me? Or was it a fall that I could handle? That injured, yes, but handle. And with this realization, I had only one choice. That was to call Dave, who was ahead of me, maybe 20 feet, and tell him that I couldn't go forward and I couldn't turn around. I was absolutely stuck where I was. So now I was going to not count on myself at that point, but to count on Dave and to develop some confidence that he could do something for me with himself to get us across the face of this mountain. And it was at that point that he turned and said, let's turn around. I said, I can't. I can't go forward and I can't go back. I can't move. So he came toward me and extended his hand. I was able to take his hand, and I shuffled across with my right foot ahead, my left foot behind my right heel, and shuffled on this very narrow path as Dave was able to make his way somehow ahead of me across the path. And at that point, we got to the other side of the face of the mountain. I did not buckle. My knees were holding me up, and that's about all I can say. Then it was Dave's turn.
Well, having gotten ourselves out of that mess, I guess the lesson for me is, as it relates particularly to COVID-19, we can't go back. We have to go forward. And we can go forward as best we can with the knowledge that somewhere out there the path will widen and will be more welcoming, and we will be back to whatever new normal is available to us.
And with that, the path widened out, and we were both able to then walk down the path that we had seen on the map was there, and we walked our way back to the car. And the lesson that I learned was to count on my faith. However this turns out, I was going to be able to handle it, whatever it was to be.
Hey everybody, greetings from the top of Reynolds Hill on the campus of Colby College, and here we are. It is an absolutely gorgeous day. The sun is shining, there's a slight breeze, the black flies are not yet out in full force, and I have a gorgeous view of Waterville. You can see maybe the smokestack down in Winslow across the river there. It is an absolutely gorgeous day, and I love to come up here and just stare down into the distance and know that the city of Waterville and our church is tucked down sort of in the river valley below, and to know beyond that is the Kennebec River, and beyond that is Winslow. And then if you look a little bit farther in the distance, I'm not sure if you can see it here, but there are mountains in the background, especially if you look a little bit farther north. And it's just such a reassuring feeling. So I think it's especially important to find places like these in such a stressful time. And what an amazing story that Nancy and David told about their experience on Mount Rainier. What I like so much about that story is that they described how they were in a situation where they couldn't stop, they couldn't go back, they just had to move forward and make it through. And I feel like we're in exactly the same situation right now. We can't go backwards, we can't stop and stay where we are and maintain the status quo. We just have to make it through. And the critical piece of that is just you have to make the decision that we will make it through. You just simply have to have the faith that we'll make it through. And I've been thinking a lot about, what it means to be living in this time of COVID-19. And I'm thinking about a class that I recently taught in my industrial organizational psychology class this semester. And it was about occupational health psychology, and in particular about stress and the strains that stresses cause. So I think it's fair to say that the COVID-19 pandemic is one big stressor that could probably be broken down into all kinds of other little stressors. So the formal definition of a stressor is that a stressor is any type of event, experience, or environmental stimulus that causes stress in an individual. These events or experiences are perceived as threats or challenges to the individual and can be either physical or psychological. So in a nutshell, I would say that it's pretty accurate that the COVID-19 pandemic is a stressor. And the question is, how are we going to handle this stressor? In fact, even before we get to that, why is stress bad, or why can be stress bad? Well, because of all kinds of negative outcomes that can result from it, and in particular, mental health outcomes. So if you experience an acute or a chronic stressor, that can lead to all kinds of negative health outcomes. That can lead to depression, anxiety, that can lead to a lack of motivation. It could lead you to not taking an interest in the things that you normally take an interest in, which I guess is a symptom of depression. It's a stressor that we have to social distance, and we can't be, in close physical proximity to the people, or to many of the people who we care most about and who we look forward to seeing more than anybody else. So there's a whole raft of stressors. And the question is, what can we do to deal with these stressors so that they don't have such a strong or negative effect on us? And there are two different ways that we can deal with stressors, generally speaking. There's emotion-focused coping, and there's problem-focused coping. And so with problem-focused coping, you essentially tackle the problem, you tackle that thing that is the stressor, and you try to remove it. And I think one of the reasons why so many of us feel powerless right now is that we can't really tackle the COVID-19 virus in the way that we'd like to. We just feel kind of handcuffed, or sort of ineffective in doing anything against that. We need to eradicate this virus, but we know that it's going to be at least a year, if not longer, until we develop a vaccine for it. And there's also some question about whether or not it's even possible to develop a vaccine. So another way that we could try to solve the problem of the COVID-19 virus would be for the entire world to quarantine itself for, let's say, 3 weeks, and then the COVID-19 virus would be eradicated. It would just die out. But that's not possible. And so we're left with these other sort of, let's sort of say, halfway solutions, where we try to limit our social contact, we invest in personal protective equipment, we try to get the testing up and running, and of course, I think it's fair to say that as far as PPE and testing, that at least in our country, we're just not up to the level where we want to be in order to feel safe, going out to stores, reopening schools, and kind of living our lives in as much a normal way as we could expect. So, given that we are sort of thwarted in terms of our problem-focused coping attempts, there's also another coping strategy that we could use to try to deal with the stress caused by COVID-19, and that's emotion-focused coping. So what are things that we can do to address the emotional effects that the pandemic has on us? And one of the things that I like to do is, if I can, just get out into the woods and just have some time to, if I can, just appreciate the beauty of the planet, feel the wind blowing in my hair, enjoy the sunlight. Today is actually today's Thursday, May 14th, and it's actually a nice day. So it's nice to be out here and just feel the sunlight. If you can, it's always good to move your body. There have been studies that have shown that if you exercise, you actually regenerate brain cells, and that exercise is actually even better for your brain than doing, brain teasers and intellectual activities. Just get out there and move if you possibly can. That's one way of feeling a little bit better. I wanted to talk a little bit more about some other aspects of the pandemic, and as this pandemic drags on, and as the death toll continues to increase, and as we remain socially distanced, we're tempted to get discouraged. And sometimes I have to admit that I feel a little bit like the gloomy Kerplopus in today's story for all ages. For a few weeks or even a few months, social distancing during the pandemic might seem bearable. But after a while, this relentless, unending status quo of the pandemic can take a toll on us. And maybe at first, in some way, it was kind of nice to be home and to have more time to devote to household tasks and projects. Maybe you had been meaning to reorganize your office space or to declutter that particularly problematic corner of the living room. Or maybe you had always, in the back of your mind, wanted to bake a loaf of bread, but you'd never gotten around to it, and this is the perfect opportunity to bake bread. And also, maybe the bread was sold out at the grocery store, so if you wanted bread, you were kind of forced to bake it yourself. Maybe you were interested in trying out a new recipe, also because going out to eat wasn't an option. Maybe you're appreciating the opportunity to spend more time than you would ever imagine to be able to spend with your spouse or partner or children or whomever it is that you live with. Or maybe you're just appreciating being on your own and being able to take a time out from social interaction and other social obligations. I've been in touch with a few introverts who have said, hey, this is great. I don't have to deal with people. So for them, there is kind of a silver lining for the pandemic. And maybe you're fortunate to have a job where you can telecommute instead of commute to and from the office every day. Instead of spending half their lives in transit between home and work, some folks have had the great experience of not having to waste their time, energy, and money on commuting to and from work. And even better, maybe some companies and organizations are starting to realize that it's not actually necessary for people to be in the office physically, or at least not in the office as much as they normally had been required to be. So think of all the positive impacts that this lack of commuting is having on people and on the environment. Less stress because of the commuting, more time for people to do other things instead of sit in their cars or on trains or in airplanes, and less burning of fossil fuels. So there is a silver lining here. There are some potential positive aspects of the pandemic. On the other hand, we have to realize that this situation might not be so great for lots of other people. Maybe now, due to the pandemic, you're forced to spend the majority of time with people who you don't want to be with. Maybe getting out of the house and being able to see different people and other things was your escape from an unpleasant or unhealthy or even abusive living situation. And as this pandemic drags on, maybe you're becoming increasingly worried about finances. You're unsure whether you'll still have a job from one day to the next. Or maybe you're an essential worker and the nature of your work is such that you must leave the house and that you must interact with others and that every day you risk your life. Regardless of your current situation, whether you are fortunate to have a positive living situation and stable finances, or whether you have an unhealthy living situation, or unstable employment, or you have the immediate threat of contracting COVID-19, I think that at some point, all of us are beginning to ask, when is this going to end? A friend of mine recently sent me an email in which she said, "This pandemic has really affected me, I have to say. I can feel myself slipping into a depression about the state of the world. Is this the beginning of the end? Will our kids even have a future? Our grandkids? Ugh." And now we can see the temptation to open things up and restart the economy. A lot of governors have started to reopen their states bit by bit. And the thing that really concerns me is that according to a projection by Nicholas Reich, who is a biostatistician at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, the cumulative death toll in the United States will reach 110,000 people by June 1st. And just to put that in perspective, as I was writing this message yesterday, actually on May 13th, the death toll was at 82,683 people. So that means that between now and June 6th, which let's say is roughly 3 weeks, that another I don't know, 27,000 people are projected to die. And many of us are forced into a difficult decision of whether to play it safe or to risk some social interaction. And social interaction is extremely important to our mental health. And I think that the importance of mental health can't be underestimated during this time. We have to sort of thread the needle between being safe physically, but also taking care of our mental health. And so maybe it's okay if we go out and, have a conversation with somebody else 6 feet apart. Maybe it's okay that we make these online worship services and we follow social distancing best practices while Annabeth plays the keyboard and someone records her while she plays the keyboard. I think that these calculated risks are worth it. I think they're important for our mental health. I think that they keep our faith community intact, and I just think it's necessary. My family has recently merged bubbles with my parents. I guess merging bubbles is what they call it now. And I can't tell you how happy my kids were to finally be able to hug their grandparents again. And we told them about 5 days out that we were going to see my parents, and they were counting the days to see my parents. And I think that my kids have been doing actually great during the pandemic overall, but I think after a while, this idea that they couldn't really see people in the way that they were used to was starting to take a toll on them. And the fact that they were just counting down the days to see their grandparents showed me how important it was to them to be able to see them. And Torin said to me, Daddy, do you know the first thing that I'm going to do when I see Baba and Poppy? And I said, what are you going to do? She said, I'm going to give them a hug. And then Emrys came along and he said, and I'm going to give them a kiss. And when we saw them, that's what they did. And of course, my parents were so happy too. So I think that, we just have to strike this balance between being safe physically, but also taking care of our mental health. And as long as we take very calculated risks, I think that those risks are worth it. And I just think back to the story of David and Nancy Wynn, and have faith that the path will widen, because the path will widen and we will make it through. And by the way, we just have to keep moving forward. So thanks everybody for watching this online worship service, and thank you so much to David and Nancy for their amazing story of faith and perseverance.
As we leave this community of the Spirit, by Richard S. Gilbert. As we leave this community of the Spirit, may we remember the difficult lesson that each day offers more things than we can do. May we do what needs to be done, postpone what does not, and be at peace with what we can be and do. Therefore, may we learn to separate that which matters most from that which matters least of all. It is now time for the Unison Benediction number 680. Let us go, remembering to praise, to live in the moment, to love mightily, to bow to the mystery.